Okay. Welcome everyone to today's workshop. This will take place in two parts. First, I will speak about Git, giving you a gentle introduction to Git, and then Wolfgang will speak about workflows for TEI Publisher based editions. My name is Joe Wicentowski, and I have been involved with the eEditions organization and work at the State Department. Speaking today in my personal capacity, not representing my organization at work. And Andreas, are there any other introductions we should make beforehand?
No, I don't think so. We just can start, I think.
Okay. All right, great. So just a technical note, kind of a program note here. I've got a camera on me, so you can watch me speak, but I also have my screen. I'm sharing my screen. So one of the windows you should see is a web browser. It's currently on the eeditions.org website. If there's any problem with the audio or video, just let me know. So a gentle introduction to Git. I assume everybody on the today's presentation in the audience has heard of Git or GitHub or GitLab, and you may have visited pages on their websites to learn more about certain projects or download resources. For example, the eEditions organization has several Git repositories. The TEI consortium maintains the guidelines there, but I assume you haven't used Git itself to manage your own projects, and that you haven't published any of your work to GitHub or GitLab. So I assume what you'd like to learn today is what Git can help you with and how it can fit into your work. Now, first, a note on terminology. Git is this underlying technology that we're talking about. There are many pieces of software and many services that use Git, and many people, many people have their favorites, and there are many good options. But rather than enumerate all of those options and all of those different software projects and services, I'll just focus on GitHub and GitHub Desktop today, for the sake of brevity. I'm hearing a little bit of audio from the other participants, so if you could mute your mic, that would help everybody hear me and Wolfgang later. So what is Git? Git is known as a distributed version control system. So rather than defining all those terms up front and giving you the history of version control systems and how Git fits into it and builds on those past technologies, let me just lay out what work is like without a version control system. Many of us know this feeling of you're working on a file, you're hitting Control S or Command S to save your work. You want to prevent your work from being lost. So besides saving files on your computer, you might have a backup hard drive or some Dropbox type of setup, and you make sure to put a copy in those places for safekeeping. But sometimes you're working on a version of on a document, and you want to keep the existing version the way it is, and then start work on a major new version of that same document. So rather than, you'd risk overwriting the work that you've already done if you just start, say, delete the section and start writing something new. So what most people do is they make a copy of the file that they're working on, and maybe they'll call the first version draft, and then they start work on a new version, and then that becomes draft 2, and then you've got a whole bunch of files on your hard drive, draft 2, draft 3, draft 4, and then you get to a final version, you stick final on there. Maybe you put dates in some of these saved file names, and you send it to somebody else for their comments, and they append their comments and add that to their file name. So you're using a file system with many files, all named something different, and various backup solutions. And you've got basically your work is sprawled over many different locations. It's hard to tell what actually changed too between any one of these files, between any one of these versions. There's no prose description of what changed. All there is what you have in the file name. And there's no real system supporting you other than your own head. So you've got to keep in your own head which of these files is the latest version, and so on. And this becomes a real problem for a digital edition project, especially one that involves more than one person, because it's hard to transfer that knowledge that's only in your head to other people. So this is really the area that Git helps with. It helps in numerous ways. It preserves a history of all of the changes to the project's files. It takes essentially snapshots of an entire project's files, which means that you can roll back to an earlier version of a specific file or of the whole project if there's a problem with a newer change that somebody made. So you can go back to old versions, recover work, and you can see what changed between each of these versions. You can see what changed at the file level and what changed across the whole directory of a project's work. Also, while you're working, Git helps you see what changes you're thinking about making. And you might notice that you actually don't want to make part of some of the changes, so you can kind of discard those selected changes and make sure that you only submit the intended change to the project. So it really helps with project's organization and a project's management of its intellectual assets, the files where everybody does their work. So Git gives your projects all these benefits: control over your files and your work, rigor in that there's a strict version control system, safety because you can roll back to old versions, and reliability. And I think this really is what you'll start to feel is a very compelling benefit of Git. You start to rely on it to track the changes in the project, and it sort of becomes the source of truth for your project and your project's history. So far, I've just really been talking about Git itself, but I mentioned at the very beginning that there are services built on top of Git, services like GitHub and GitLab. And what those services add is a means of communication between project members. You can coordinate your work on major new changes to your project. You can comment on other people's work. You can kind of create action items, problems that you can list problems that you want to solve. And then when you solve those problems, you can refer to those problems in the changes you submit to Git. There's a review system and an approval system for changes. And when you're using one of these services like GitHub, you can work in private by yourself or with other team members so that nobody else can see, but you can also work in public. And for those projects or parts of your project that are public, those services serve as a public open system for other people who are interested in your work to discover your work and explore it, and even to contribute to it. So besides these general benefits that I've been talking about of Git and GitHub that many organizations use it for, and organizations doing software development or digital humanities, I think Git and GitHub are particularly well suited to TEI edition projects. And that's because Git really works best with plain text files that TEI and XML files are by nature. If you're using plain text files, you can see at a very granular level what changed in one project member's work. And it's if you were using binary files like Word files or PDF files in Git, although Git has no problem storing those files, you really can't see easily what changed from version to version. But with plain text files, like all TEI files are, Git is a perfect match. And for TEI projects, digital edition projects, I think your goal is really for your edition to be visible to your readers, to your public. And you might have a project website where the kind of public version of your edition can be viewed, but GitHub can serve as a kind of counterpart to the public website, where people can see your actual source files, your master digital files, and you can actually invite them to contribute, correct problems. You can find new collaborators much more easily, I think, for a project that uses GitHub. So just a program note reminder that to help with bandwidth, if everybody could please turn off your video feed and mute your mic, that will help everybody see the video and audio. I am hearing some typing, so if everybody could please check that you're muted, that would be great. Okay, so I've been speaking in general terms, hopefully not too technically, but in understandable terms, hopefully. And in order to make the inevitable technical terms make sense a little bit more, I'm going to just lead you through a demonstration of how you can use, how you can get started with Git and GitHub. So I'm going to be using software that is produced by GitHub. It's called GitHub Desktop. You can download it from desktop.github.com or just Google sorry about that. I noticed something bouncing there. You could just Google GitHub Desktop, download it to your computer, and let's get it started. Really makes getting started with GitHub quite easy. All right, so this is the screen you'll see when you first start GitHub Desktop. If you don't have an account yet, you can create it through this screen. Or if you do have one, just click on sign in to GitHub Desktop. If you're already signed in, you can skip the whole logging in with credentials and things like that, which is nice. Once you've gone through that screen, you just confirm your name and email address. I'm happy to help them improve their software. And you come to this screen because right now, GitHub Desktop doesn't have any local files to show you, or you haven't added any remote projects to it. So I am just going to create a new repository. And a repository is the directory where you're going to store your files, and GitHub is going to manage all the files in that directory for us. So let's call this my first repository. Fill in the form. By the way, if you're not seeing my screen, look around in the tiles because I'm sharing my screen, and it will help to look along with what I'm doing there. And you can choose where those files are on your computer. I'm going to stick these on my desktop so that you can see those files just pop up right away. I'm also going to have GitHub Desktop initialize the repository with a README file, so it will just stick a README file, a simple plain text file, in the directory to get it started. And I'll create the repository. We'll see it appear on my desktop. We'll see that in this directory there is a README file. I can open it up and see what GitHub Desktop created for me. It really created a markdown file that has a top-level header called my first repository, and I can clean this up a little bit and save it. Now, do you see that change that I just made? I took away a new line and took away a space, added a new line, and then I came back to the GitHub Desktop. And right away, it shows us that change that I just made. It shows that the original line, a gentle introduction to Git, was deleted from its perspective. A new line was added and new text was added. The exact way that GitHub Desktop shows you what changed can be a little confusing, but it generally does a good job of tracking what changed and what was deleted and what was added. Now that GitHub Desktop has detected that change, we're going to make our first what's called a commit to our Git repository. A commit means we are saving the changes to the repository. So I saved the file, but those changes haven't been saved to the repository. That's what our commit is going to do. And this is a step where we get to use prose to describe the exact change that we're making. I'm going to give this change a prose description of cleaned up README, and I will commit this change to the repository. Okay, the commit is done. I can undo it if I want to, which is a nice feature here in GitHub Desktop, but I can also now see the history of my repository. In the first commit, which happened when I followed the wizard to set up the repository, Git did this for me automatically. It created the README file. And the commit that I just made, we can see that I cleaned up the README file, and we can see those exact changes. This is really the heart of working with Git and working with GitHub Desktop. You can save, you can work in whatever text editor or whatever software you use to work on your edition. Save those changes using those editors, and then you come to GitHub Desktop or to your Git client, and you describe those changes with prose and add commits. And so far, I've just been working on my local system here with GitHub Desktop in this folder on my desktop. But we can also publish this repository to GitHub. which would immediately allow all of you to go and look at it on your own computer. So let's do that. I'm going to click on Publish Repository. It remembers the information I gave before when I started the repository. And there's an option to keep the code private or not. I'll make it public. And if you're part of an organization, you can associate the repository with them or keep it under your personal repository. So I'll publish this repository to GitHub. Okay, it's done. Now we can go back to our web browser, go to github.com, and I want to see my repository. There it is, my first repository. Here's that markdown file rendered as HTML. And we can also see the history of those commits. The initial commit that GitHub Desktop made for me and where I cleaned up the README file. And the views are very similar between GitHub Desktop application and the GitHub website. So everything, all these views should look quite familiar. Now I'll show you something maybe a little more specific to TEI that will give you a sense of how to work with TEI files in Git. So I've got a TEI file here called china.xml. It's a TEI file containing one paragraph. This is adapted from a project I have at work. And to add this to the repository, I will drag that file into my first repository. I will close it here because I don't think Oxygen noticed the change. So I've added china.xml into the my first repository directory. Let's see what GitHub Desktop notices. Go into it right away, it realizes, oh, there's a new file in your directory. And all the lines in that are shown as new lines because it's a new file. I'm going to commit that file by giving it a prose description. I can have an extended description here, which is more paragraph length if I need to. Usually this first box is for a short description. I'll commit that and go back to GitHub Desktop, GitHub website and hit reload. Where is china.xml? Well, I forgot to push the commit to the GitHub remote github.com repository. And GitHub Desktop shows us here that there is one change that needs to be pushed, or is ready to be pushed, one commit that is ready to be pushed, and I'll click on push. There we go. There are no more local changes, no uncommitted changes even. So now when I go back to github.com, here is china.xml. The history of the repository shows when the commits were made, down to the minute, millisecond, time zone. It shows who made the change. Each change has its own URL. So if I want to show somebody that I made a change that they requested, I can send them the public link to that commit. Okay, now let's make a more interesting change to our TEI file. Kind of showing how work could progress, for example. First, I'm going to add some new text to the first paragraph. Goes here. And I'm going to save, let's see, get GitHub desktop here ready to capture this. And as soon as I hit save and go back to GitHub desktop, it shows us the newly added text. I can commit this change. Say that I finished the first paragraph. I'll hold off on pushing this until we have a few more changes. Now let's add basically the whole rest of the document. Now we've got a really nice big long TEI document. And then let's say I notice, oh, I misspelled the name of somebody. I can fix that here, save it. GitHub desktop points out not just the line where the change was made, but the character where the change was made. And that's, again, very granular detail about the changes you made. I can push that whole batch of 3 commits that I've made here locally on my computer to GitHub so that they're all public. Push those to origin. Origin is the remote server. And what shows up here top is that I've corrected the spelling. That's the most recent change. But again, I can look at the whole history. I can see where I added the paragraph, where I added the rest of the article, and where I corrected just that spelling. So you have a one-to-one relationship between the work you've done on your computer and the work that everybody else can see in your project or in the world. I'm just going to show you one last thing because my time is close. That you may have noticed that when I added the text from these other files, some of the lines got very long, and some text editors that you may have will have a function like Oxygen's to format and indent. Once I click on that, that fixes all the lines and keeps them to a consistent line length. I think in this case, it's 100 characters wide. When I do that, GitHub detects changes throughout the document because I basically changed every line. So GitHub is doing its dutiful job, but it can be difficult to detect what actually changed here if there were other changes that I made of substance. So a good rule of thumb for TEI projects that have long files is to separate your commits into substantive ones, such as the ones that I just made where I added text, corrected misspellings, and between reformatting work. Oops. And if you give the reformatting changes a clear prose description, maybe I'll call it format and indent. Commit this, then you and your team members can see where you made a specific change, like correcting spelling, and where you just made some batch formatting changes. So it's a good practice in general to distinguish between your substantive changes to files and any formatting related changes. You might start your work in the day by applying some formatting changes so you have a nice clean copy to start with, and then make your substantive changes. or just work with what was there, and at the end of the day, make one final commit. So in the short time that we've had for this, I hope it was a gentle introduction. We've covered why you would want to use Git, what it can offer your project, how to get started with a repository, how to make commits, how to publish those changes, and that's about all that a short introduction like this could show. What I would like to just tease you with is the idea in Git of using branches. And that is a way that you can work on files and a colleague can work on files, and your changes don't have to overwrite each other. And it's kind of like making a copy of a whole repository for one person to work on, or for one batch of changes to be worked on. And this is a really vital way for multi-person teams to work, is to add branches to the project. And then when the work is ready to be brought together, you can merge those branches. And I'll show you where that is in GitHub Desktop. You can create a new branch, such as, we'll call it technical editing or something like that, or I could call it Joe. And I could work in this, push my changes. You would not see those reflected in the main branch like everybody is, but my new branch would be selectable somewhere else. So that's just a brief introduction to GitHub. And there are many resources online for working with and learning Git. So I would recommend you to investigate those. And of course, we are in the editions community through Slack, happy to help advise if you have any particular challenges, if we can help. So now I'll turn it over to Wolfgang, who will talk about TEI Publisher based apps and workflow. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks a lot, Joe. Could you stop sharing your screen? Then I can share mine. Okay, thank you. Let's see if that works. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I would like to talk about two topics. One is a workflow for your data and your code. And then I would also like to show you some tools with which you could support the editorial workflow, so the actual TI encoding. We will start with, well, building upon what Joe already presented. I'll just assume for the reminder of this workshop that well, you work with TEI Publisher. Well, you can also work with other tools. The procedure is similar, but let's say you work with TEI Publisher and you created a standalone edition. But you also want to keep your XML TI data and the code in Git, so you always have it versioned. And the basic steps how to do this, you can read on the LTech app. That's a showcase app meant as a tutorial. So it has this about.xml, which describes in detail the steps required. Basically, what I assume is, so I created an app, like for example this one. I call it Deutsches Textarchiv, and I have uploaded 2 documents from the Deutsches Textarchiv, so Nietzsche's Also sprach Zarathustra and Schiller's Wilhelm Tell. I created this app. Now I want to get a copy of it to my local file system so I can put it into Git. So what I do is basically download the app as a XAR. So XAR is this interchange format used by Exist. You could directly pass this XAR on to another user who also has Exist installed, and this user could then upload it to his or her database instance. But for this tutorial, we just want to have a quick look at what's inside this XAR. So what I do, I go to my command line. I want to create a new directory where I put this stuff in. So let's say DTA, and then I just use unzip. For sure, you can also do this with the graphical file browser if you like. I feel more familiar with the command line now. And then I just unzip this generated XAR, which I downloaded, and it gives me this structure. This away. Then I could basically push this to Git. So for this, I would need to do Git init once. And then I basically need to add my Git repository with Git remote. So this is all documented if you create a repository. Let me go to that page again. Where is it? Here. So here I created a Git repository, and then GitHub is so nice to actually show me the necessary commands. So what I'm doing is basically this. Okay, so I need to do this git remote add. Then I need to add the stuff in my directory. Then I do git commit, and then I say initial commit, and then git push -u origin master, and then hopefully this will put it into my Git repo. Now it's packing the stuff, takes a bit, uploads, and now if I go back to my Git page and reload the page, then I can see that now my app, my freshly generated app is within Git. Now, if I want to rebuild this app, then all I need to do is within the directory call a build tool, which is named Ant. It needs Java, so you can install it. You have to install Java, you have to install Ant, and then this command should be available. So you just type Ant. And you can see that it creates me another XAR file, which I could then use and via the dashboard deploy to a different Exist instance. But we'll come back to this later. For now, we'll talk about different workflows first. So the basic questions you have to ask. I mean, you have two things. You have your application inside Exist as an XML database. You also want to keep a copy of that data within a version control system. And there are at least two basic ways to approach this. And the questions you have to ask yourself is, where is the master? What should be the master copy for your data and your code? Where will you make changes? So if you are working in a team of multiple editors, how will your editors apply changes to transcriptions or other documents? How are changes tracked in version control? So when do you track changes? After every change being made, or at a certain point in time? And then how do you deploy changes to the database? So when do you make them public to be visible for other people? So those are the basic questions you should ask yourself before making a decision. And then we basically have two scenarios. We can say our database, So the TEI Publisher app or another app, that's our master. So all changes are being done in the database. Or we can say, no, we don't want that. We want to use Git as the master. Basically, in both scenarios, we will use similar tools, if not the same. And I will explain that in a minute. So for scenario one, database as the master, we assume that all editing is done within the database. So people are always connecting to the database and changing XML files there. However, we want to take backups, which are then in the form of snapshots. Yeah, so at a certain point in time, an administrator will take a snapshot of what's inside the database and will sync it into the Git repository. For sure, there should also be other regular backups, but basically to publish your current version, you would take a snapshot and sync it into Git. For the editors or tools people can work with, this means that you have a choice between Excite. So Excite exists web-based editor. Obviously, this always works inside the database. So whatever you change there will be saved into the database. Then there's our favorite XML editor, Oxygen, which provides two ways to connect to an exist database. So there's, first of all, the WebDAV protocol. That's a more or less standardized protocol, which Oxygen speaks and Exist speaks as well. Then the third option would be also Oxygen, but this time not via WebDAV, but through the database connector. Yeah, so that's a different protocol, which provides a few more options than WebDAV, but concerning the basic support for opening documents, saving documents, and so on, it's essentially the same. You could also use other editors like Visual Studio Code. We will see that for scenario 2. Now, how would you do it in Oxygen? Well, basically, Oxygen does not only have an open file button in the toolbar, but it also has one which, in my case, because my computer speaks German, says URL öffnen, so open URL. And if I click there, I'm presented with this dialog where I can select a file. So it shows me what I selected before, but I want to use another file. So I'm going to this. And now the URL you have to enter basically is, well, like in your web browser. Yeah, so when you have Exist in your web browser, it will likely run on localhost 8080/exist. And then you just add /webdav for the protocol, /db, which is the root of the database. Username on a standard installation would be admin, but you can also use TI and simple as password. And then you click on connect. And what you see is essentially a copy of well, the collection structure inside your database. And I said I created this app called DTA. So, and here I have my documents. Let's select the Nietzsche. And then I just click OK, OK. And now Oxygen communicates with the database and retrieves the content of the file. It's not nicely formatted, but that's well, that's coming from Deutsches Textarchiv, where I downloaded the stuff. So I can reformat it, and then it looks a bit nicer. Basically, now if I click save, it will save this into the database. Maybe we can just make a small change. So let's change this in the Edition workshop for a test, and go to the web browser and then see if this has changed. So now we have empty pages. Hello, need to scroll. No, I didn't get it. Ah, here it is. Okay, so it's like on the 6th or 7th page of this, but you can see that the change I applied in Oxygen now is immediately reflected in my DTA app, which is running inside the database. Okay. Back to the slides. So this is the scenario database as master. I won't show you how to use Oxygen database connector. That requires a bit more fiddling, but it will work and is quite powerful. So advantages of this scenario obviously are it's an easy work environment for users. So all they need is Oxygen, and they need to know how to use this open URL dialog. Absolutely no Git knowledge is required to use this approach, and the changes, as we have seen, are immediately visible. So whenever I edit, the change gets immediately synchronized with the app running on the database. The disadvantages are obviously that you are depending on the database, or frequent backups are absolutely vital, but they should always be. Then between doing snapshots, changes are not tracked. So essentially, if I create snapshots always at 4 o'clock in the morning, then between 4 o'clock yesterday and 4 o'clock next day, I don't know who has changed what exactly. Okay. Likewise, authorship of changes is also not recorded. So you don't really know who has changed what. That's a disadvantage. But that said, I do have projects where we are using this approach since 15 years without much hassle. So coming to the second scenario where you use Git as master. So in this scenario, Git is the master, so all the editing should be done on the cloned Git repository. For our choice of tools, this means that essentially we can use something like Visual Studio Code, which has extensions for exist. We will look at that in a moment. You can for sure always use Oxygen or any other editor you like. So if you prefer VI or Emacs or something like that, fancy, then no problem. It's just working on the file system, so all those editors will work. However, what you are changing will not immediately be synced to the database. So if you want to have your changes displayed in the database app, you either need to rebuild your package. So that's what I just did on the command line, calling ant, which creates this XOR, and then I can redeploy this XOR into my database to see the changes. Or I can use a background task which automatically syncs changes. So let's have a look at this. Off and switching to my just created repository. Let's say I want to edit things in here. Then my favorite tool here would be Visual Studio Code. I started on the directory I created. So there it is. And now in there, if I look at some of the XML files, I can change them in the same way as before. However, if I edit any, I can also format them, so just to make it a bit nicer. However, if I edit anything in here, it's not automatically synchronized with the database. For this, we need to install some extensions. So Visual Studio Code is it's a Microsoft product, but it's completely open source and it's free, so it doesn't cost you anything. And there are lots of extensions you can install, and all those extensions are usually open source as well. So you can not only use them, but you can also improve them if you like. So as I said, all the power of Visual Studio Code comes from its extensions, and there's one extension specifically for XSDB, which I can install here. So obviously it's called something with XSDB, exactly, so there it is. I click on install, and now it has been started. And important is to notice this little pop-up window down there, which says this package requires a small support app to be installed on the XSDB server. Do you want to install it? And I click on install. So now it's there. And I can just close this. And now what this gives me is, first of all, support for xQuery. Yeah, you may not need that, but the developers among us will. So let's just open an xQuery file, one of the larger ones, maybe like this. So now you have syntax highlighting for xQuery, and you get some help on mouse over, and a lot more. You can find the functions defined in here. So if I want to go to a function, then I can click here. Yeah, so that's the xQuery editing, but this is out of scope for this workshop. Just showing it to you so you know that you can have decent xQuery support if you're a developer within Visual Studio Code as well. However, this extension I just installed, it also comes with a synchronization task, which I can activate. And I need to activate it manually. The reason for this is that in previous versions, we actually had it automatic, so it would start whenever I open a project folder. This is dangerous though, because it happened that by mistake, someone did a git pull, just to look at something or switch to a different branch. And then in the background, this sync task was happily uploading all the changes into the database. And suddenly there was a version in the database that person did not actually want to publish, okay? But it was live because it was all automatic. So in the new version, we made it not automatic. You have to enable the sync manually. So what I can do, there are two icons here. One shows the name of the current project, DTA, go away. And the other one says off. If I click on the off, no, I need to configure first. So to make the sync work, I need to configure the sync because it doesn't show me any action right now. So for this, I just type Command-Shift-P, which is standard Visual Studio shortcut for get me all the commands you have. And then I search for XSDB create or edit configuration for folder. Click return. Then it asks for which folder. I only have one. And then all I need to fill out here basically is the collection inside my database where I have my new app. So I type db apps DTA. That's where it is. I save. And then let's try this sync thing again. Now it doesn't work. Okay, so it happens sometimes that it does not get updated. If so, then what you do is just reload the current window. Nothing will get lost. It keeps everything. All right, now let's click on this again. And now it tells me DTA start synchronization. I just do return. And now if I change anything, I don't know, what do I change? Let's change this Autosprache. And let's see now down in the bottom window, it shows me that it's uploading the file as application XML. And if I go back to my application and click on start, I can see that the title of my file has changed. Okay, So this synchronization picks up my changes, the changes I did in the file system, and shoots them into exist. This is just one example of such a synchronization tool. There are others. That's the one I'm mostly using, and I think other people as well. There are alternatives you can also use. Where are my slides? For example, there's also a build tool called Gulp, and there's an Gulp plugin for ExistDB, which can do more or less the same and a lot more. So Gulp provides you a complete, powerful environment for doing all kinds of build tasks. Disadvantage is that the configuration is slightly more complex. Okay, so what are the advantages of this scenario? Well, you always keep a clean state within your Git repository. So everything you do is tracked in Git. All changes are tracked. You always know who did what. Yeah. So if your colleague has done something stupid a few hours ago, you can exactly see who it was and blame the person and or roll back the change. Yes. So essentially, you can always roll back to an older version quite easily, which is a big advantage. Well, the disadvantages obviously are that the work environment is slightly harder to set up. So if you have to tell your team how to do it, it needs some pretty good documentation, or you have to show it. You need to have some not only basic Git knowledge, but quite good Git knowledge, because when working with Git, you can run into what's called merge conflicts, which you then need to resolve. Yeah? So if two people have changed the same TI file, it may happen that Git is unable to merge the changes by those two people automatically, and it requires manual intervention. So you need to know how to work with that. Essentially, tools like Visual Studio, but also Oxygen do have some Git support built in, and they do provide some support for this kind of stuff. So I have a Git browser here, and we know that I just changed this Zarathustra. And if I click on that, I can also see my change here. And if I wanted to commit that, I could just do plus and then commit like stupid change. And then click on push, and it's being sent off. So that's also possible from within the editor, makes things slightly easier, but nevertheless, there will be cases when you really have to resolve conflicts, and there you need to know what you do. All right. So to summarize, we can choose between two scenarios. In the first, we have database as master. So from within the work environment, whatever editor you use or other tools or web applications, you update content inside ExistDB. Then at some point, you have to synchronize the changes which are in ExistDB into a cloned Git directory and commit from there. So that's the database as master workflow. And we have Git as master, where you have also a work environment with more or less the same editors, except that Excite will not work in this scenario. You save your file to the cloned Git directory, and you have some kind of synchronization going on, which then uploads the changes into ExistDB. Okay, I would like to add a little outlook for TEI Publisher 8, because yeah, we are trying to make those things easier. because while we are using those workflows in many projects, and e-Editiones for sure has the goal to simplify editing workflows for everyone. So what's planned for TEI Publisher 8 is basically a way, if you're using Git as master, to with a click on a form in your TEI Publisher app, update either the entire app, or set up an incremental update trigger, which will then automatically push changes as they arrive in the Git repository. So this is to avoid the command line. Yeah, so all the command line magic I did now in the shell window would hopefully no longer be needed, or only for administrators if things really go wrong and they need to intervene manually. But for normal users, we could kind of abstract this away within the TEI Publisher web page. Likewise, the other way around, if you use database as master, we would like to have a form within TEI Publisher or the generated TEI Publisher app from which you can commit a single file. So the workflow would be you make your changes within the database, limited to one file usually. Then when you view this file, you will have a button where you can click and you get this commit dialog, and you can directly commit from within TEI Publisher or the generated app. So that's planned for TEI Publisher 8, and yeah, I can say that we are already working on it and are quite advanced. So it will come for sure. So now we talked about data workflows, but let's have a quick chat about editorial workflows. So go away from just basic XML editing or xQuery code editing and towards the work editors usually have to do. There's another extension which has been first published short before Christmas. Another Visual Studio Code extension which adds more advanced XML editing. It also allows you to preview changes you make within the editor. So see your TI document rendered through TEI Publisher. Plus it offers an integration of authority databases for the semantic markup process. So we actually implemented this first for the CalBART project because they're one of the main tasks which needs to be done is adding the semantic markup. So finding mentions of people and places and all that stuff. And previously it was quite tedious because, yeah, you know, you need to create a place name with a ref or a key, but you have to look up that key somewhere. Yeah, so you have to open a web page, you have to search for your preferred authority database, say GND or whatever, until you find the person you're looking for, and then you have to copy an ID and insert it into your XML. So for each person or place, this takes like a minute or so, and if you have to do hundreds or thousands of people and places, that's quite time consuming. Yeah, so we built this Visual Studio Code extension to make this faster and easier and more fail-safe because we can avoid copy and paste errors. Likewise, also implemented for the CalBART project, we do a word-based workflow, and we will just have a quick look at that later. But let's see the Visual Studio Code extension first. I'll get out here. So we can see that here we have basic XML support via a plugin which was created by Red Hat, it's quite good already, though it still has some little issues. I'm reporting them to the developers. But what it can do is already, so if you go here, it will automatically show you what elements would be possible at that point. Okay, maybe here it's not. So let's go into the full text somewhere. Yeah, so if I want to insert something here, then it already filters what I can insert by what's allowed at this point by the TI schema. So it automatically loads the TI schema in the background, and it also provides me documentation. It does validation. So I have some red markers here, like this one. And it clearly says, yeah, I need an attribute unit for this element, and it's not valid as is. So if I just add this unit, and I don't know, page, and the red dots go away. So it has validation and covers, well, it covers the basic things Oxygen also does for you. For sure, Oxygen is still a lot more powerful. But for the basic editing, this Visual Studio Code extension already covers a lot of ground. However, not enough ground for my taste or for the people who have to work with those TI documents. So I created another extension, which is called TEI Publisher VSCode. If I install that, I get additional functionality, like, for example, so editing functionality. Say I want to wrap something, yeah, like this here. I want to wrap into a term, so I can just press Command E on a Mac, and then I enter the name of the element. Now that's the simplest change. I can also remove that by using Command Alt X. Yeah, that removes the element around the cursor position. If I need to select the whole paragraph, then I can use Control Command E. So this just selects bigger and bigger portions of my document. Also quite useful. And I can split paragraphs. Say I want to split this paragraph into two at this point. Then I can just do, what is it, Command Shift D. And I have two paragraphs, and I can do another one here, Command Shift D. And now it has, well, this was not quite right. It should not have had a hit here. Try again. Heiliger. Okay, that's better. Oh, so it mimics some of the key features or key keyboard shortcuts, which I use mostly in Oxygen. If you have other things you are missing, then just tell us. It's not that difficult to add something to those existing shortcuts we already created. But now, the interesting thing is, if you work with a document like this one, and you just want to get a preview of how it would look like if rendered through TEI Publisher, then you can do that. You just press Command Shift A, and you are presented with a list of ODDs. Those are the ODDs which are available on the server you are talking to. And here I just take Deutsches Textarchiv, and I click, and then I get this preview. Okay, so let me switch to another project away from this Deutsche Textarchiv. Say this is my Karl Barth project. Just to show you the configuration. No. Let me choose a document which has less markup. Yeah, this has still less markup. So to talk about the configuration, if I do again this Command-Shift-A to get a preview, I'm still only getting the ODDs of TEIPublisher.com, so the public TEI Publisher server. But I actually want to use this project with, I want to use this project with the Karl Barth server, so I can configure that. I just open the settings, I search for TEI Publisher, and then I have an endpoint here, and I can change that. So I want to preview my stuff with Karl BGA pilot.karlbarth.ch. Okay, and then I go back to the document command and click Command-Shift-A again. And now I'm getting actually the Karl Barth ODDs to select from. And since this is a letter, I'm using letters. And voila, it already looks closer to how it would actually display on the website. So this is a tool for editors to just quickly see what the result of their edits would be on the website without having to actually go to the website or upload the text. So the text is dynamically being sent to the server, it is transformed there, and then the HTML is coming back. Okay, so another feature we desperately needed was support for authority files and semantic markup. So let's find something we can mark up here. For example, here we have a place, Marburg, and we want to encode this with a geolocation. So we can just press, Command-Shift-E. And now you can see on the bottom right that it has been searching through GND. That's the main German authority file. And it offers me whatever it found for Marburg, which is quite a lot. But the first one is actually the city. So I can click here and it automatically inserts for me the place name with a reference. So with this GND ID as reference. This is configurable, so you can configure what kind of markup it should produce. And we can also try the same with this guy, Samuel Preiswerk. So just Command-Shift-E. And it actually has found him, and I think it's Preiswerk Saracen, yeah. So we can encode this. However, this is Karl Barth project, so we are not using GND. We are using a different authority database for the project. So I want to configure this to use that instead of GND. So I will just remove what I just did, using the shortcut, and go to the configuration. And there I can go to the API config. And what I want to change is, instead of places, we use KBGA. That's the Karl Barth Gesamtausgabe. And we use KBGA here. And you can also see that you can provide templates to change what is inserted when you select something. So let's see if that works. We can try Marburg. And now you can see that for places, it was looking in KBGA, and we have other places listed. So I can just mark this. And again, I can search for Samuel Preiswerk. And I get one from the Karl Barth archive. So, okay, if I save this and have synchronization off, then it would automatically be sent to the database, but I can also get a preview. Just do this Command-Shift-A again, select Briefe. And then I can see that, contrary to before, I have this Marburg marked up now, and I have Samuel Preiswerk marked up. And if I mouse over, I get a short description of that person from the archive database. And likewise for Marburg, I get a description from the archive. Yeah, so that's basically this bit. So we are doing this for a large number of volumes, which have already been published. So they are already in TEI, but all this semantic markup is not done yet. So it has to be redone. However, there are also new volumes published. And for this, we developed a Word-based workflow, which I would just quickly like to show you. Where's my Word? Hello. Oh, there. Okay, so that's one of the workflow, one of the Word files our main editor is working with. It has a very strict style definition behind it. Yeah. So if you want to work with Word, it's important that you're really strict about using styles and conventions. So you can see that here certain things are marked up with angle brackets. Yeah, so like here, that's an organization, and in order to add the database key, which later grows into the key attribute, you need to use some kind of convention. Convention here is to use those angle brackets. That's because Word is relatively stupid, so it cannot have like nested styles and stuff like that. So to work around this, you need to use some conventions. But otherwise, you have the same features here as well. So let's say we want to encode this Gottlob Wieser. So we can just say search for this guy. And then I click on this, and it automatically inserts the person, assigns it the correct style, and the ID is added as well. So all this can also then be sent through this preview feature, just as in Visual Studio Code. I mark just one paragraph now, and then I say load, and it converts this to TEI, and then uses TEI Publisher to render the TEI into the output as it would appear on the web page. So despite the fact that this looks fancy, you have to be aware that, as I already said, Word is rather limited in its possibilities. So you can use it for some types of projects where there's not too much nested markup. So in those texts, obviously, most of the markup is relatively flat. Here it works. For more complex projects, I would not recommend to use Word. However, it can be an option if you have to work with rather simple data structures, rather simple TEI. And you have editors who are willing to stick to conventions and to using styles, because that's also absolutely a requirement. As soon as an editor tries to mess around with things like font sizes and whatnot, then it breaks. Well, it will not break, but those changes will just be ignored because the transformation only respects defined styles and not arbitrary styling. Okay, so that's basically the end of my part. I have some links here. We will publish the presentations on the website after this talk. So you can also get those links. Okay, so I see Joe has already listed the links. All right, are there any questions or other things you would like to know? Okay, so if there are no questions, I think we have recorded this, hopefully, and we'll try to put it up on YouTube after it has been edited.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe and Wolfgang. I don't know. Nobody has a question. That's strange, isn't it? But
Timon
so
wanted
then,
to say something.
Yeah, just a simple question. This word-based approach, Word will replace what in this case? I'm sorry, I'm new to this.
Okay, yeah, I did not explain that. Maybe it converts, so the Word is converted into TI. It's not using style sheets. It's using TEI Publisher based ODD, and the results are quite good. So what you saw live was essentially the conversion as we use for publishing the printed books, and there's only minor manual editing required afterwards. So the quality is good enough to more or less, yeah, pass this to the publisher afterwards with some proofreading, but the TI output is good enough.
Thank you.
And essentially the Word to TI transformation is documented on the TI Publisher website. There's one demo file which has been converted from Word, and it contains examples for what's possible. So if you're interested in that, just have a look at tipublisher.com and search for the Word example in the test documents.
Okay, but I just while you were giving the presentation, I was installing the Visual Studio and the TEI extension. Just to make sure it's still worth getting to know all these things, right?
Absolutely. I mean, nothing. Yeah, I mean, nothing will replace some XML editing skills. Yeah. So as I said, for some projects you can use something like Word, but agreeing on this was a longer process. So it took us, yeah, several meetings and weeks to really get this working. Yeah, so you can use Word for if you have people who are, well, completely unfamiliar with XML, then using Word can be an option, but it's work. So you need to yeah, you need to set this up. You need to set up styles because without styles, you won't get very far. Yeah, so it's a lot of work which also has to be done. So if you have people who are familiar with editing XML, that's always the best.
Thank you very much indeed.
other questions? So in any case, you could leave us some feedback whether such workshops are productive for you or helpful, or if you have ideas what we could have as another subject for the next workshops. Maybe
What's the best way to provide feedback, Andreas?
I don't know, Slack probably, I don't know, or an email to the board.
And that email address?
info@eeditiones.org. So maybe I can just say for the Calbat, we chose the Word workflow because there was already a Word workflow, and the editors were very used to it. So we didn't change too much there. And we have quite a lot of editors who are old and won't change anything in their workflow. So it was probably the best thing to do it in Word. Okay, then thank you, Wolfgang and Joe, for the inspiring presentations. And we will end here, I think.
Okay. Then have a nice
Thanks
evening.
very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
See you next time.